The Stoic philosophers talked about voluntary discomfort. And I think that things like Spartan are the antidote to today's world of comfort. And I actually think that this is one of our biggest feelings is this predisposition to comfort. Now, if you're a hunter-gatherer and you're living in a friggin' harsh world where you are struggling just to stay alive, avoid predators and try and get enough food and enough warmth to stay alive, seeking comfort is a good thing, right? Because you're all going to get around the fire, you're going to huddle up, you're going to tell stories, and that's important for keeping the tribe together. But when we transport that genome, which hasn't changed, by the way, if we transport that 45,000 years later into a world where we have created comfort and convenience everywhere, where you can sit on the couch and go, I fancy McDonald's or KFC or Dunkin' Donuts, whatever it is, and you can just call up and this stuff gets delivered. We have all this ability to avoid discomfort. And I actually think it's one of the biggest things that is bringing our species down.
Welcome to the Spartan Up podcast with Joe De Sena, founder and CEO of Spartan Race.
We are talking about overcoming obstacles. The same way we teach people to get over obstacles on the course, we will teach you here on the Spartan Up podcast to get over obstacles in your mind.
Can you inoculate yourself to stress? Paul Taylor of the MindBodyBrain Performance Institute says you can. He calls himself a PracAdemic, part practical, part academic, and he studies stress, resilience, and high performance. He's Joe's guest on today's episode.
This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by the Exogen Ultrasound Bone Healing System. Exogen is a non-invasive treatment option that can help heal your broken bone. To learn more, visit exogen.com/Spartan.
Joe De Sena here, CEO and founder of Spartan, where we try to rip you off the couch. We get you moving, we get you healthy. I got Paul Taylor here, Mind, Body, Brain Performance Institute. Do I have it right?
That's it, Joe. You got it right.
This lunatic is up at 4 a.m, somebody after my own heart from Australia. And Lisa Tammany introduced us, so we got to thank her. But let's get right to it. I want to be a high performer. I'm listening. I'm watching this thing.
Yeah.
Do I have to wake up at 4:30 in the morning?
It's not mandatory, but I tell you, you ask most people, it is the best time of the day. It's when you really can be focused and get stuff done. But it also does depend on your circadian rhythm, right? Because some people are natural morning people, some people a little bit later.
And that accent, you were in British Special Forces, but you're Irish, is that right?
So British Aircrew, Navy Aircrew, but I'm Irish.
And so why should we believe that you're an expert in resilience and grit? Is it the military background? You've been doing a bunch of studies, or what do you have that you could teach us?
Yeah, look, so I call myself a PracAdemic, right? So that balance of practical and the academic. So when I left I spent 8 years flying in helicopters and doing anti-submarine warfare, helicopter search and rescue, combat survival and resistance to interrogation, all that fun stuff. And then I left the military and became a geek. So I'm now a neuroscientist, an exercise physiologist, a nutritionist, and I'm currently doing a Ph.D. in psychology, where I am focusing on resilience. So I'm working with the Australian Armed Forces and developing and testing resilience strategies.
All right, so you're clearly an expert. I like it. And look, we all should be more resilient. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I tell people deep down inside we are all resilient, but we've learned helplessness in this soft world. Is that a fair statement?
Mate, you are singing my song. Absolutely. So there's a lot of people out there that will talk about resilience in terms of positive psychology, right? It's all about gratitude, empathy, mindfulness. And I say, you know what? That stuff is necessary, but it's not sufficient. what a lot of people don't realize is that the biological aspects, and I like to talk about the psychophysiological aspects of resilience. So there's a lot of psychology involved in it, but there's also a lot of physiology, and that ability to adapt to stress is the thing that actually underpins resilience, right? So for me, a lot of resilience actually has to be earned. And you do that through exposing yourself to stress and adapting to it and becoming stronger, right? What we call in science, hormesis. That which does not kill us makes us stronger. You know, Friedrich Nietzsche over 100 years ago came out with that statement.
Yeah, I like that. We like to say at Spartan, we manufacture adversity. Probably very much like the military does in those first few months of training. They're manufacturing adversity. I guess where parents fail, where most parents fail, is we take that stress and that adversity away.
Yeah.
Most parents, I think, fail because they remove that stress, right? They put that safety net under the child. They don't manufacture the adversity, and they think they're doing the kid a favor, but they're not.
Look, absolutely, they're doing them a misservice, and you know, it's what we call helicopter parenting, and it's well intentioned that you want to keep stress away from your child, but what a lot of people don't realize is this whole concept of stress inoculation. And that's what the military refer to this type of training that we went through, right? It's stress inoculation training. So you think about what's an inoculation? Well, we talk about vaccines now, right? And traditional vaccines, you get a little dose of the virus so that your body can actually adapt to it, right? And I think you guys talk about Spartan, and I think that's really important for people to understand. It's the easiest thing for people to understand is that exposure to exercise. You get bigger, faster, stronger because you expose yourself to the stress of exercise. And when you actually expose yourself to the stress, we release these things in our body, in our cells, called stress response proteins that actually drive adaptive processes. And the key thing that I tell people is that we became the dominant species on Earth largely because we adapted better to stress than any other species. But since the Industrial Revolution, we've stopped adapting to the stresses of our environment, and we've changed our environment progressively more and more. And particularly, I think, in the last 30 years, we've changed it to such an extent that we're no longer optimally matched to it, right? And this is the trap that parents can fall into, that by keeping little Johnny away from stress or whatever, you're actually doing them a disservice. And it actually becomes a challenge. You know, I grew up in Belfast in the 1970s from a mixed marriage, and we were brought up as Catholics, but always lived in Protestant neighbourhoods. So when you go to school every day wearing a Catholic uniform in a Protestant neighbourhood, it's reasonably resilience building, right? And now my challenge as a parent is I bring my kids up in a bubble within a bubble within a bubble. And what I mean by that is I live in Australia, which is a bit of a bubble country, right? It's beautiful, but it's not like the most of the rest of the world. And I live in this little village that is just this awesome little place, but it's actually a bubble. And then my kids go to these awesome schools with awesome teachers, and they're brought up in a bubble within a bubble within a bubble. And one of the things that I struggle with as a parent, how do you bring up resilient kids in a bubble within a bubble within a bubble, right? That becomes a challenge. And so I talked to my wife. She vetoed my first suggestion, which was taking them through kiddie version of combat survival and resistance to interrogation training. But we settled on sport, because I think that sport or something like Spartan, and actually my whole family have done a Spartan race, and it was awesome. So hats off to you, Joe, and all the guys at Spartan. But when you do exercise, when you do sport, a particularly competitive sport, that is one thing that you can throw your kids into, you know, because there's adversity. You know, they lose when they should have won. Somebody cheats, that sort of stuff. And so for us, it was saying to our kids, right, you got to do a team sport and a martial art. And I think those two things are really, really nicely balanced.
I've been thinking a lot about, you know, families that have done financially well throughout history, in most cases, the children don't do as well because the kids are in a bubble within a bubble within a bubble. Yeah. Maybe that's the reason. And so I said, I said to myself, could you put some standards in place for children to make it more likely the next generation would be as successful or more successful across all parts of life, not just financially. And I thought, if each child was mandated to learn a martial art, if each child was mandated to speak another language, right?
Yeah.
You probably just those two things, maybe a musical instrument, because each one of those requires a lot of introduction to stress, and work, and it sucks, and you don't see the progression when you want to, right? And you lose, like you said, like so. So I agree wholeheartedly. I wish every country, every culture still had rites of passage when kids were, 16, 17, 18 years of age. I love that Israel puts kids through mandatory military. And, if you're listening or you're watching and you're not a big believer in the military, whatever, okay, maybe you got to go out and kill a lion or swim across the English Channel. I'll come up with something that's going to make that kid tougher, right?
Yeah.
So I'm with you 100%. So look, a lot of people are making a mistake. We went through the parenting trap. Let's call it the parenting trap, where you're making it easier on your child. What other traps do people fall into? I mean, as you were talking about stress inoculation, I was thinking, but come on. I mean, think about how hard it is waiting for the next episode of Peaky Blinders to come out on Netflix. Think about all the stress.
Look,
last episode is over and you got to wait.
Yeah. But this is the thing, right? Is that a lot of times you don't have to wait, or you can go and jump on there's something else, and there's this immediacy, right? But I think, to your point on that line of thought about how do we do our kids disservice, what other mistakes? I think one of the worst things that was introduced was this whole idea of boosting people's self-esteem, right? And particularly our kids' self-esteem. And it was introduced in the 80s and 90s, actually in the United States, that on the back of some research that showed that people who had higher self-esteem actually did better in life. And then they took that and then did the misplaced thinking that if we can boost people's self-esteem, then they will do better. And there was some really flawed research that showed that if you could boost people's self-esteem, they committed less crime and all of this. And actually started in California. And there's a bunch of people who lobbied the government, got some money to run programs to boost self-esteem, right? And they had a university look at it and follow it around the research, right? And the university kind of went, actually, it's not showing very good outcomes overall, but they cherry-picked the research, like lots of things happen now, right? And said, hey, this is showing there's a real benefit. So this just got into the whole psyche in America and then in other places. And we started on this well-intentioned but ultimately flawed idea that if you can boost your kids' self-esteem and tell them that they're awesome and tell them that they can be anything they want to be and all of this stuff, that it's actually going to have a real benefit. And it actually went the other way. The research is now showing that when you falsely boost self-esteem, that it actually does a disservice, right? And then, you couple that with the whole social media thing, and these kids are seeing all these Instagram influencers going, you can be anything you want to be and we're living these wonderful lives, which actually isn't true, right? But they then think that by the time they're 20, if they're not running a successful startup and an orphanage in Nepal, that they're actually a failure, right? And so this whole idea of falsely boosting that self-esteem, I think has been one of the other things, along with that whole idea of removing them from stress. I think when you couple those two together, it's a disaster for raising kids. It's the wrong environment.
We you and I definitely speak the same language. I mean, you can't fake that stuff, right? I've got a sweatshirt my friend sent me last Christmas, and it says, "Nobody cares, work harder." And that's my message to kids. That's my message to my wife, anybody that, like, whatever, life sucks and then you die. So get your shit together, work harder, and get through it. What could people do? 3 things people could do. You and I, we just said we got to model that. We got, you got to develop that muscle. 3 simple things people could do at home to be more resilient.
We'll be right back to this interview, but first, a little bit from our sponsor, Exogen. Spartans, a broken bone can interrupt daily activities and, even worse, keep you on the sidelines. Determining the best treatment option can be stressful. In just 20 minutes a day, Exogen helps jumpstart your natural bone healing process so you can get back to the race. Don't let a broken bone keep you on the sidelines. Talk to your doctor to see if Exogen is right for you. Exogen is indicated for the healing of non-union fractures and for accelerating the healing of certain acute fractures with no known contraindications. To learn more, visit exogen.com/Spartan. That's EXOGEN.com/Spartan. Okay, back to the interview.
What could people do? 3 things people could do. You and I, we just said we got to model that. We got, you got to develop that muscle. 3 simple things people could do at home to be more resilient.
Right. So one thing I'm a massive fan of, right? So we'll talk about a couple of different ways to attack it, right? One, through that physical stuff. We've talked about things like Spartan race. Doing a more intense exercise is actually really important, because if we think about the biology, when you're doing intense exercise, it is releasing stress hormones, right? It's releasing noradrenaline, I think you Americans call it epinephrine, norepinephrine, other stress hormones. And we learn to be able to deal with that, particularly that high intensity exercise releases that. When you look at anxiety, it's really high levels of adrenaline, which we call noradrenaline, in the brain, right? So learning to do higher intensity exercise is great. Another thing on the same thing, I'm a massive fan of cold water exposure, right? And you don't have to go full hog and get in an ice bath. Just having a 30-second cold shower at the end of your normal shower is a really, really useful thing. And actually, Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, talked to himself, and he said that he should be doing cold water bathing and vigorous exercise. He said because Marcus, they both develop character, and it is this character that you will need to face challenges in your life, right? So that's one thing, is that stress inoculation, that exposure to stress. Another thing is around the mindset stuff, right? So I'll give you 2 things on the mindset stuff. I like to get people to think about the voices in their head, right? And we all have voices in our head, positive, negative, and everybody here who's listening to this can relate to a version of them that's a little bit crap, right? This is what I call your inner gremlin, right? That is the version of you that's just not so good, that has the negative self-talk, the self-doubt, the self-criticism, all of this. But then you create another version of you that the Stoics actually called your inner sage, right? This is the best version of you, right? And you create these 2 characters in your head. And when you have that negative stuff going on, the first step is actually being the observer and going, there's the gremlin. Gremlin, thanks for that story that you're telling me, the negativity, whatever. But it's not helpful right now, right? And that's where you consult your inner sage, your best version of you. The Stoics talked about your eudaimon, your best inner spirit. So I actually get people to write down the character strengths of their best inner spirit, and they can add little extras. I call them the plus ones, right? So I may, whoever that guy was who crossed the finish line, who no legs, you might think, I love the way that he is ridiculously resilient and driven. So you're going to write down that your inner sage is ridiculously driven, right, and resilient. You create the best version of yourself and then give it a little sprinkling of steroids. And then when you're struggling, you say to yourself, what would my sage do? I think that's a really, really useful technique. In psychology, we call that self-distancing, where you're actually referencing someone else to get advice and having your best inner spirit. Now, I actually get people to rehearse that every single day, right? So that's one other thing. The last thing I would say is gratitude, right? And a lot of people, they talk about gratitude, and there's some fluffy stuff about gratitude, but when you get really deep on it, and again, Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, I was reading in his meditations where he said to himself, Marcus, memento mori, which means remember that you are mortal. And he said to himself, remember that every day that you could die at any point. He said, not to be morose, not to be negative, but to remind yourself that life is a precious gift and that you should wake up every morning with extreme gratitude just to be alive. And you should use that thought, memento mori, to judge your behaviors and your actions that day, right? And when you think like that, when you actually get up in the morning, and I got up at 4 a.m. this morning, you're a little bit tired, and then I remind myself every morning, memento mori, you could be dead. So you need to be extremely grateful just to be alive. So given that context, what are you going to do today, right? That's that thing. I think when we take that memento mori, the inner sage and the gremlin, and use that concept, and then willingly expose ourselves to physical discomfort. A lot of people talk about discomfort tolerance. I like the term, and I'm researching this in my PhD, discomfort harvesting. How do we actually harvest that discomfort to make us better? So that would be, if you're going to talk about 3 tips, they'd be the ones that I would say. And that combination is important.
I love it. You and I are so aligned. I mean, one of my sayings to myself, to my gremlin, when I'm having a tough moment, and I tell my kids, I said, well, it could be worse. I could be dead.
That's it.
But I'm not dead. So anything is better than dead.
That's
and then the other one for you to use, if you don't know this already, is the great samurai. I lived in Japan for a little while. I was led to believe the great samurai, every night before bedtime, they would burn all their possessions and their family in their head. So when they woke up and they saw their family and they saw their possessions, they were grateful for everything because they had nothing last night. Now they have everything.
Awesome. And here's one to throw in on the gratitude, Joe. Sorry, just to add to that. And I love that samurai thing. So you think of it this way. If you could only bring to you, so you do this in the evening, if I could only bring into my life tomorrow what I was grateful for today, then what would I have, right? And I think that's quite linked in with that samurai story. So if you're not grateful for it, you can't have it.
I love it. I want to get you more involved in Spartan because you're so on brand and you're telling the story. And for the millions of people out there, literally millions, 14 or 15 million people a year come to our website, and only 10% of them actually take the cold shower and push the button and sign up for a race.
Is that right?
So I'd love to get the science out there that says, hey, this is not silly. This is not stupid. This is not superficial. This is for you. You have to do this.
Absolutely. It is that the Stoic philosophers talked about voluntary discomfort. And I think that things like Spartan are the antidote to today's world of comfort. And I actually think that this is one of our biggest feelings is this predisposition to comfort. Now, if you're a hunter-gatherer and you're living in a friggin' harsh world where you are struggling just to stay alive, avoid predators and try and get enough food and enough warmth to stay alive, seeking comfort is a good thing, right? Because you're all going to get around the fire, you're going to huddle up, you're going to tell stories, and that's important for keeping the tribe together. But when we transport that genome, which hasn't changed, by the way, if we transport that 45,000 years later into a world where we have created comfort and convenience everywhere, where you can sit on the couch and go, I fancy McDonald's or KFC or Dunkin' Donuts, whatever it is, and you can just call up and this stuff gets delivered. Where you don't like what's on the TV, you can surf all of those channels, right? There's a bit of light coming through the window. I'm just going to press a button and my blind will come down, right? I don't feel like going to work today. I'm going to have a mental health day today, right? We have all this ability to avoid discomfort. And I actually think it's one of the biggest things that is bringing our species down. And I think we need more people like you in the world just to nudge people and give them the opportunity to harvest discomfort. I think that's pretty key.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Spartan Up Podcast. Spartan Up is your partner in resilience for mind, body, and spirit. We're here 3 days every week. Do you know someone who needs a little nudge? Maybe they could use some motivation, tactics to be stronger, healthier, happier, more successful. Tell them about our show. And if you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment. We want to know who's watching and who's listening. Thanks. See you next time. This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by the Exogen Ultrasound Bone Healing System. Exogen is a non-invasive treatment option that can help heal your broken bone. To learn more, visit exogen.com/Spartan.